This story begins with a very ordinary peaceful day. The sun is shining brightly outside, people are going about their business with a smile on their faces. Nothing seemed to go wrong, and no one could have imagined anything would go wrong. This guy in headphones is called Johnson. He is just as happy as everyone else going to school, and so far does not even suspect that he will become a key character in the future events. Suddenly all those who were in the area began to feel strong points from under the ground, and a little later a bright blue light began to appear, which clearly symbolized the start of some process. As one could already assume, people were not on a joke frightened. First of all, they thought that there was an earthquake, or some sudden terrorist attack on their territory. But everything turned out to be much more mysterious. A certain part of this city literally began to explode into the air, causing a bright blue light to appear around it. After a few moments, most of the city rose above the clouds, and looked like some kind of toy figure. Now it was impossible to leave this place, because its borders were covered with a thick layer of glass. To put it mildly, people are in a state of utter bewilderment. Cell phone and internet service is no longer available, and contact with the outside world is almost impossible. Since our hero is an avid manga reader, he quickly realized what had happened. But at the very least, it was a shock to him that some stories he had read earlier turned into reality one day. The system's account appeared in front of all the people who had fallen into this trap. Through it they were informed that the game has started and it is necessary to throw the dice. So far people did not even approximately suspect what all this means and where to find the dice. Suddenly, in the middle of the day, it started to get dark outside. It would be logical to assume that it was another solar eclipse, but not this time. The people looked up at the sky and saw something horrible, namely a huge dice falling from the sky right on top of them. Johnson was speechless to say the least. First of all, it was scary that the cube could break through the glass. Thankfully, despite the rather strong impact, the glass easily withstood it. As a result, after the landing, the number 3 fell out. At the same moment, the system alerted everyone that figure number 8 was moving 3 fields forward. It's also surprising that it's moving at a tremendous speed, and of course, at that speed, there are no consequences in the city. At the very least, people fall off their feet, and at the very most, a house could fall down, which in the end would have terrible consequences. From that moment on, Johnson realized for himself that they were definitely called into the game, but they were not players, they were just a small part of the game piece. The players are the creatures that roll the dice, and this city for some reason became one of their pieces. But how could this even happen? But even if we accept the fact that the players needed a figure, they could have just summoned a part of the city, without touching the civilians. Why they did such a terrible thing, in general, so far our hero has more questions than answers. At this moment the system again sends notifications, in which it informs that the figurine has arrived on the field of protection, and for a choice of difficulty and time of protection it is necessary again to throw a dice. As a result, after throwing a number under number 1, it means the first level of complexity, and the repeated throwing has given out a number under number 3. It means that time of protection will last during 3 days. Then, in some magical way, the process of map creation started, and a land plot was added to the level with the city on the left side, which was the same in its squareness. There were beautiful rocky mountains, dense green forests, and a couple of small bodies of water. Honestly, this place never ceases to amaze, how land can appear just out of nowhere. In general, the preparation phase is almost over. The defense mission of 3 days should begin soon. The loss will be counted if the people lose all their bases, and then the defeated figure will be simply destroyed, and with it all the inhabitants who accidentally fell into it. To put it mildly, the people were completely bewildered, and very angry. Absolutely none of them wanted to play, or even try to defend their bases in any way, at least not surprisingly, because they had been dragged here by force, against their own will. Everyone around them started shouting loudly and demanding that they be brought back. Meanwhile, our hero was well aware that this makes no sense, and if it was necessary, the owners of this game would have contacted them long ago and offered evacuation. after the process of supplying citizens with all the necessary uniforms began. Now the only thing that people should be completely focused on is these notifications. He has to roll a dice that has 100 ribs on it. Johnson had never seen a dice like that before. While people were trying to figure out what was going on, a man noticed that something was coming at them from a neighboring location and alerted everyone. Of course, it was hardly the rescuers, and you could see from afar that literally every single one of them was armed. As it turned out later, it is just a huge crowd of aggressive monsters, from which people just have to protect their bases, of course, if they want to survive. Since the game had just started, people didn't know how to behave in this situation, so they just started screaming, running in different directions hoping to hide somehow and survive this first wave. Unfortunately, there were a lot of monsters. They grabbed people mercilessly and knocked them out with their weapons. As Johnson was too close to the epicenter of events, he could not escape. One of the monsters came right up to him and hit him hard on the back with his wooden bat. The guy flew a great distance and landed hard in a pile of boxes. From that moment on, Johnson fully realized why ordinary people are needed in this game. Their main task is to defend the city as they progress towards their goal. If you look at it all from the outside, you'll realize that this is a very ordinary board game for superior beings who need to have some fun in this life. After such a strong blow, Johnson was practically immobilized, and will not be able to run. Realizing this, monster headed in his direction to as soon as possible to put his opponent out of his misery. But suddenly behind his back from nowhere appears a woman. In her hands was some good weapon, and behind her back huge wings. She certainly does not look like an ordinary person. After landing, the girl immediately inserted this spear into the ground, after which a fire tornado began to form, gradually expanding and pulling in more and more monsters, until the area they were in the end. At the moment of such a sudden attack, people almost immediately lost any hope of survival. But a miracle happened and they didn't even know what to say. All the monsters lost their lives just an instant. Oka. At least now they are curious to know who it is, such a powerful girl. Her name is Lady Eva, her personal level is level 1, and her class is ordinary citizen, but at first glance you can't tell. All her power lies only in the weapon she carries. This legendary class spear allows the user to borrow the power of an epic dragon, and use it at the right moment. Then she ordered all the early ones to flee to the tower called Namzen, and the military police to create a line of defense. Also the girl to the ordinary people, recommended as soon as possible to throw a dice, so that they get their weapons. Also, in addition to weapons after the throw is determined by the class of the person, and if it turns out to be the most ordinary, the best option is to retreat. To be honest, people were quite skeptical about what she said, but they decided to try it anyway. When everything started to happen exactly as she said, people were surprised to say the least. They could not believe that it was not a dream, but that everything was really happening. In the meantime, the second wave of monsters came. Eva still continued to fight them fearlessly. Also, the guys who had a magic class did not hesitate to rush to her aid. On this day, all the people who got into the game said goodbye to their normal lives for an unknown period of time, and began a whole new journey. Unfortunately, on the first day of this new life, countless people were wiped out, most of whom didn't even have time to throw a bone, because they didn't adapt in time, and didn't follow the system's instructions. But among those who survived, true heroes were born, with very different abilities. When things quieted down a bit, Johnson found the strength to throw the bone to the floor. Right now, he's just an ordinary level 1 citizen, but by chance he's got the number 100, which means he's going to be the strongest captain in the figure 8. Unfortunately, who the rest of us will soon call the worst scum of this town. Anyway, after the throw, Johnson got the Demon King's Sovereignty Book of Die. It allows you to use the library of the Demon King, who can control anything and everything. It can also be used to find out absolutely any information. But there is one nuance. If a guy through this book will help any of his family or friends, the rewards received by users thanks to the secret book information will automatically be transferred to the owner of the book, and no matter who does not want to fix it is impossible. These are the rules. And now a little about the statistics. from the moment the mission began, has already passed 3 hours. During this time 3.102 people lost their lives, and 7.023 wounded. One of the bases has already been successfully destroyed by monsters. In fact, this is a very scary figures, and if something is not done immediately, it could end very badly. The first wave was finally repulsed, but Eva was tired, but it was not surprising, because she was giving 100%, and in addition to fighting, she also had time to save people. Everyone was delighted with her, to put it mildly, and among themselves nicknamed her a goddess. Just when it was all over, the Korean army did not arrive at the scene of the massacre. They asked the early and ordinary citizens to get on trucks as a matter of urgency, and then evacuate to the Namsan Tower. The captain personally approached Eva and thanked her for a job well done. Thanks to her, it was possible to gain a lot of time. The army police were able to normally organize and distribute it in different places from which the enemy can potentially attack. The name of this military man is Justin. He is also like Eva of the first level and has the class of an ordinary citizen. His highlight is the Inquisitor's helmet, which is created in special material. Thanks to it, the user can never fall into a state of fear or bewilderment. Since calls and the internet are not working, the military is communicating by radio, so soon it will be possible to get reports from every place in which there was some kind of trouble. Since there are no monsters here yet, Justin suggested not to linger, and also together with him to go to the tower, so that the girl can at least a little rest. When Johnson showed up, he told the guys not to go anywhere, because this isn't the end, it's just the beginning. Apparently he learned that from his magic book. Anyway, according to the guy, the boss is gonna show up soon, and it's best to start fighting him as far away from the next base as possible. Then, to confirm his words, the boys showed the book in which it was written to the boys, but they saw nothing else but blank pages. As it turned out, only Johnson could see its contents, and in principle it is quite logical, because otherwise anyone could get hold of this book and use it for their own purposes. To make sure that Johnson was not crazy, the soldier asked him to tell him a little more information, for example, to read some text. He started with Justin, namely his helmet, told all the characteristics and positive effects, then moved on to the girl, and fully told all the information about her spear, starting from its origin and ending with its combat power. Well, now the guys were 100% sure that Johnson was telling the truth, because even they didn't know their subjects so thoroughly. In this case, it was necessary to get ready immediately, because they were really going to meet the boss. Without wasting any time, Justin immediately picked up his walkie-talkie and contacted the main headquarters, to warn them of the not-so-good news. From time to time, Johnson will occasionally wonder if his ability is some bug and nothing more. In his opinion, one of the players found this malfunction and for some reason gifted it to him. In this case, John is 100% sure that the day will come when he will be able to return to the real world. So Justin got the authorization from the general staff. Now it's literally a game of luck for him and the rest of the military, because they're willing to trust whatever Johnson tells them in order to effectively defeat the boss. So the military officer is asked to provide all the information about what's going on, very clearly, and then hands him a walkie-talkie. The guy did a communications check first, and then said that there's a little story about a defense mission that's going on right now. In general, its essence is to protect bases from waves of monsters, which come exactly every 6 hours, and at the end of each wave appears a boss, which must also be defeated. At least this time should come two-headed ogre. The complexity of this boss of the first level, he uses only magic and melee. People will only win if they can defend the base 12 times a week and defeat all bosses. Also, Johnson once again said that he has all the information about the mission, and if you use it to build a strategy, you will definitely survive. Also, the guy promised that in parallel he would look for a way to return them all to the normal world. To be frank, Eve first respected the first person she met after 10 minutes of acquaintance. She was very touched by the fact that Johnson thought not only about the mission, but also about the consequences that could be. And so in general it is initially worth reading what the guy could not see while he was unconscious, namely all the information about the book Crossing. In general, as it turned out, It monopolizes the rewards of not only those with whom it was shared, but even those who heard some valuable information through rumors, or in any other way. In this situation, all information starts with Johnson. Meanwhile, the long-awaited boss appeared on the battlefield. Under the clear leadership of the guy, the whole army together with Eve began to act. The main purpose of the military was to conduct continuous fire. In this way they will constantly distract the boss, while the girl is trying to destroy him. Well, while the monster is puzzled, Eva jumps out of her seat and runs to attack, using her spear to create a fire tornado, under the influence of which she begins to attack her opponent. Thanks to good hints, she manages to do it with great ease. Fortunately, the first attack was the last. The ogre simply could not withstand such pressure. To be honest, Eve herself was pleasantly surprised. She couldn't even imagine that the boss would fall so quickly. In general, now the first wave can be considered completely cleaned up. As a sign of respect for such bravery, Johnson shows a finger up for the girl, and of course for joy, she reciprocates. So far at first glance it seems that everything is going even very well. In fact, this day was the beginning of the great end. Already today alone, 91% of the entire population have fallen victim to sovereignty, meaning they knew some secret information from the book, and this is just the beginning and things are only going to get worse. In general, the defensive mission is very similar to games in a rather famous genre. When the monsters go to the base of the players, and they have to stop them. When the second wave came, the people were much more prepared thanks to the guy's setup. At first, the monsters were just allowed to enter the territory, and did not offer any resistance. But then, at one point, at Johnson's command, the men would abruptly come out of their hiding places and strike hard with heavy firearms, and as the reloading process began, the other guys would fire a large series of shots from other less powerful guns. Level 1 monsters themselves are quite stupid, and with proper training to destroy them in principle is not a strong problem. With just a few manipulations, people can calmly make them go in the direction they want, then hit them as hard as possible and separate them into different groups. Afterwards, people with higher level equipment enter the battle and slowly wipe out anyone left behind. The book that Johnson uses updates all the data on what is happening on the battlefield in real time, allowing more people to be sent to the more problematic area in advance. When a guy thinks of the information he needs and turns the page, it's right there. After each sweep, Johnson would go into seclusion and spend all his free time coming up with new and improved plans for the monster sweep. Finally, the next wave of monsters was over. The enemy had been completely eliminated, but no matter how it was, at least a final sweep still needed to be made, in case some of them were just hiding. Previously, the commanders at headquarters would decide what to do first, but given Johnson's accurate information, contact with them had lost any sense. So just recently, the guy took charge himself. He told people that this book gives only data and nothing else. From this it can be assumed that he just knows how to lead the whole city, but Justin suspects that it is not so. Probably the book gives him some more abilities and prompts him not only in terms of battles, but in principle in all plans. As soon as the opportunity arose, Johnson turned to Justin and reported that everything is almost over. Only the boss remains to be defeated, but you should not worry too much about it, because he is not as strong as it may seem at first glance. Eve and her spear should be able to take him down in one blow. By the way, for some unknown reason the girl was lying in a sleeping bag and resting. Probably she was just very tired. Since the guys turned out to be with humor, they decided not to wake her up right up to the meeting with the boss. This big guy's name is Giant Billy. Among the bosses is a level 1 monster, born weak and was thrown to his fate. Meanwhile, the boss didn't waste a minute and began to strike slowly. The driver was a real Schumacher and skillfully dodged all the blows. In fact, the guys drove into the field for a reason. The book is clearly written. If for some reason this monster gets into the city, all the bases will be destroyed. Another incredible advantage is that the opponent is quite slow and has no resistance to the elements, which means that the most important thing is to stick it properly. Eve listened carefully to this plan and did not understand only one thing. And what hail of attacks, can we talk about if in this field is only them? As we already knew, Johnson wanted Eve to do it all alone. To be honest, she was not ready for such a turn of events. But since there was nowhere to go, the girl took her spear in hand, began to generate a fire tornado, and at the same time to wait for further instructions. As it turns out, all items above heroic rank have hidden abilities, and if you fulfill the necessary conditions, it can change their form, or activate a hidden ability. In general, the requirements are only 3, and to understand what ability will turn out in the end, you need to fulfill them as soon as possible. Since the book has absolutely all the data about the items, to do it is not difficult, but even so, Eva softly speaking starts to worry, because the monster is already too close, and how to have time to fulfill these quests while she is also unclear. Anyway, the guy urged to trust him and this book. Eve had a bad feeling, but there was nowhere to go, so she was ready to trust fully and follow all the instructions. At one point, the monster comes so close that he has a great opportunity to strike. Of course, such a chance he decided not to lose, squeezed his 2 hands into one, and with all his might hit the girl. To be honest, Justin thought that it was the end, but everything is not as terrible as it may seem at first glance, especially, Johnson would never send his girlfriend to lose her life. Anyway, from that moment on the conditions were fulfilled. Now Eva will definitely get hold of some hidden ability. It's a skill called Dragon Fang. It's very grandiose. It's an insanely beautiful outline of a fiery dragon in the clouds. To put it mildly, even Johnson was shocked at the result. Of course he'd read about it in the book, but he couldn't have imagined it would look so cool. The only disadvantage of this skill is that it can be used only once in a whole mission. A blast of such power just shattered the opponent, and left him absolutely no chance. Definitely wouldn't be cool in the city with that skill. But logically speaking, Johnson's book is much more dangerous than Eva's new skill, because there's too much information in there, and if it falls into the wrong hands, the whole city could disappear off the face of the earth in a matter of minutes. It's a good thing a guy like Johnson got such a powerful object, because he's a really smart man. From now on, another defensive mission has been completed. All residents who are outside the city will be transferred back. By the way, this is quite a convenient feature. Thanks to her, wounded can be delivered to the hospital with maximum speed. And now it's time for the most interesting thing, namely getting rewards for all survivors. Initially, absolutely all people were informed that they would receive an individual reward, in the amount of a certain number of points that can be spent in the store. Of course, this caused them great joy, because there are enough seriously injured in the city, and the store provides a large assortment of very good medicines. The doctors also strongly recommended that you spend your points on medicine first, even if the player is healthy. It would seem that what could go wrong, but at one point when the guys started to check their balance, they noticed that there was no money in their accounts. This is due to the fact that all the rewards were taken away due to the effect of sovereignty sacrifice. Of course, people immediately started to resent it. They became very curious about what sovereignty sacrifice was and how to get rid of it. Then all screens received another notification, which informs that if you sacrifice 10% of the inhabitants, the reward will be doubled, and if 20%, then 3 times, well, if 90%, the reward will be multiplied by 100 times. Of course, this proposal is not tempting, because only thanks to their numbers people can win. In the end, after the general counting of points, people were shown the names of the 3 people who have the most points. So the third place is Justin 312 points, the second place is Eve 1402 points, and strangely enough the first place is Johnson. On his balance are counted, almost 10 million points. At first people were stunned, and they thought it must be some kind of mistake, but then when they personally rechecked the balance of the guy, they realized that it is actually true. After that, they wondered how it happened, and people were already 100% sure that the guy had something to do with the sovereignty sacrifice effect, because he had too many points on his balance. Since the guy didn't know about this feature of the book at the time, it was also a shock to him. Of course, in order to calm down the aggressive crowd, the guy started to justify himself, but frankly speaking, it did not help much. For starters, Justin suggested that everyone should stay calm, because at least the wounded should be treated first. So he urged Johnson to try to do it as soon as possible, unless of course he had taken the money on purpose. Of course the guy agreed and started trying to make purchases or transfers. But unfortunately he could not do anything, because the die forbids to give away items or points. Even after buying the item, the system still wouldn't let him give it to other people. It was a shock, to put it mildly, and amidst a lot of anger, the guy closed the book and threw it on the floor in front of everyone. Then he started digging through the system to find answers to some of his questions, but as sad as it sounded, there was nothing to be found. Suddenly, out of the corner of his eye, he notices that the book can fly, and at the moment is right behind his back. Frankly, it looked a little scary. Meanwhile, people begin to raise the most real riot, and ask each other for points. Also, severely injured players gradually began to lose their lives. With each minute they became less and less. Some people started to organize certain groups of people who would hunt Johnson and try to destroy him. Meanwhile, the guy grabbed the book again and started looking for answers in it, for any clue. Justin, in his turn, also got tired of this mess, so he put a gun to the guy's head and said that from now on Johnson was under arrest. As it turned out, people did not like this solution of the military, and they began to demand that the guy give the glasses, or let him just take his life, so that no one would get them. Eva in her turn restrained them as much as she could, and asked them to stay calm, because that's the only way to solve the problem. While the people were distracted by the girl, Justin asked the guy to run away and find a way to fix everything as soon as possible. That's all they can do for now. No matter how hard they try at the moment, they can't just calm down a crowd of angry people with words. So they have to go to extreme measures to somehow distract people from the subject and give them a chance to calm down a bit. In this case, Johnson rises sharply to his feet, through the store buys plus 30 units of dexterity, and literally in an instant just disappeared. The anger of people had no limit. They could not understand how the man managed to escape, right from the gunpoint, because it is just fantastic. Suddenly, the system sends out a new notification telling everyone that the next move is 23 hours 59 minutes 59 seconds away. In this situation, people's outrage is really understandable, because they have only 24 hours to fully recover their strength and prepare for a new defense, no matter what anyone says, but it's really not enough. Justin urged everyone to get back to safe areas as soon as possible to get a good night's rest before it all starts again. The first thing to do is to get the wounded into the cars, and then if there is room to load any survivors. A little later it was decided to make a meeting, the purpose of which was to determine how many people wanted to fight and how many people wanted to evacuate. For this purpose they were asked to stand in two different directions, the side for fighting on the left and for evacuation on the right. In general, those who are set to evacuate asked to check their status window more often, and in no case do not give the center of evacuation. Also, no less important is considered to remember where the temporary bases and other evacuation centers are located. And one more important rule: in case someone saw Johnson, it is necessary to immediately run away and in no case do not contact him. Upon arrival in civilization, immediately report the whereabouts of this traitor, so that the military and police can react as soon as possible and lead a capture attempt. Also, if anyone hears any light from him about the raid, then be sure to isolate yourself until the end of the mission. This is necessary so that other people can earn their points without problems. In the event that a person is victimized by sovereignty, but ultimately decides to withhold this information from the public, the military and police will perceive this as a violation of the law, and that citizen will be required to be punished accordingly for their grave misdemeanor. When the announcement was over, for the rest of the time until the next move, people finally had time to live their lives in peace for a little while, the military coming up with new defense plans, the EVA deciding to spend their free time training, and the regular people mostly just walking around and enjoying this little sip of freedom. And at the next sunrise, the player rolled the dice. This time the number 4 came up, meaning that pawn number 8 must move 4 squares forward. Unfortunately or fortunately, the pawn arrived at the seal of the Demon King, soon in the city should appear pillars that will remove the demonic seal and pillar defenders. To pass the level, you need to destroy all the demonic pillars. If the people fail, the Demon King will be summoned to the city. After a second throw, you win number 5. This means that the mission will last for 5 days. From this point begins to set the exact time, erect pillars, and adjust the complexity of the defenders. In the end, there were 3 pillars. The first one was of the first difficulty level, protected by the fallen angel who wanders in search of his lost destiny. By the way, it looks pretty creepy, especially that large number of eyes makes it even creepier. The difficult defenders of the second pillar are also level 1. This time you will have to fight with a monster called Crazy Brains. It is a creature that cannot stop creating things. The more time passes, the better things created by him. Honestly speaking, the last monster compared to this was just flowers. At least this lady is several times larger, and has a spider-like build. And now the most interesting pillar number 3, his protector will be 3rd level. To put it mildly, for everyone it was a shock, because at least the guys have never faced monsters above the 1st level. In general, he is a goblin swordsman who has reached the peak with their arts, and has undergone a body transformation. His main goal is to break the seal of the Demon King and challenge him. Meanwhile, Johnson was lying in the middle of some seal he had drawn himself, and smiling wryly. At the same moment, Justin receives operational information. For some reason, the civilians arbitrarily launched an attack. The military of course tried to stop them, but the name does not get any control. What influenced them, so no one understands. Justin decided that it was time for them to get involved, and then asked Eva what she thought about it. But as it turned out, she had been gone for a long time. She just left without telling anyone. To be honest, this is a strange act on her part, because earlier she always told about her actions to the command, but this time for some reason she decided to keep silent. As it turned out, the girl immediately went to the tower with a heavier defender before attacking the defender of the 3rd level. She looked at him for a long time, and collected energy to produce a blow of maximum strength. When everything was ready, the girl immediately went into battle. If you look at it from the outside, it's hard to imagine what happens to a man after he suffers such a heavy blow. Of course, Eva also assumed that he must have already lost his life. But as it turned out, nothing really happened. With just one hand and a big ball, the defender was able to repel such a heavy attack without getting a scratch. To be honest, it was a shock. Is there really such a big difference between the 1st and 3rd level? Then, as you might expect, followed by a retaliatory strike, after which the girl flew a fairly decent distance. Thankfully she was not injured, but at least now understands that everything is not as simple as it could be at first glance. Thanks to his book, Johnson of course was aware of all the latest events, so as it turned out he secretly got close to the 3rd tower to help Eve in case of emergency. And it really turned out to be the right decision, because literally just now the guy caught her in his arms, and did not let her fall to the ground with all her might. Johnson then urged Eve to tell the regular civilians something, namely that he would spend all their awards on himself. Since our hero is a comedian, he couldn't help but make a joke. In fact, he told them not to show up here in case they didn't want the guy to accidentally steal their glasses. Unfortunately indeed, in this world there is no way to return people their glasses. Also, the guy is no longer under any circumstances will not be able to get rid of the damn book of the Demon King, because the position of the man in this game is elected only once, and until the very end, of course, that in this absolutely no fault of Johnson. But to ordinary people who deprived of their glasses, unfortunately it cannot be explained. Before starting the fight, the guy went to the store and bought an item called status. From now on his personal level will increase by 1 for each unit of characteristic of a unit of characteristic. Thanks to the large amount of money, the guy was able to set all the characteristics to the maximum level. As soon as this happened, absolutely all citizens in the system came a large number of notifications, which reported that the resident named Johnson increased all his characteristics to the maximum levels. Of course, instead of joy they began to feel only strong anger and envy, although in fact it is worth rejoicing, because the presence of such a strong man in the city is very important. To be honest, he felt just fine, such an incredible surge of power not every day you can experience, and not everyone can do it. Now it was time to get rid of all items that were below the magic class, and automatically roll a dice on anything that would give equipment above the heroic class. Joffin ended up with 142 legendary class items and 1020 heroic class items, and that was the end of the automatic selection. Now it is necessary to place all the items received, and use them. As the guy cannot give them away to ordinary citizens, you need to squeeze the most out of them, and use them very effectively. In the end, to face the third-level monster, Johnson decided to use all the bloody rewards and power of the Demon King. Apparently he was going to deal with it in just one blow. Due to the fact that it was overflowing with incredible power, the silhouette turned bright red. It looked pretty cool. The guy made a vow to protect the city in this game at all costs, and then he's gonna go back to his normal life and live it the way he planned to live it. If it's the only way to atone for his sins, then why not use it, even though others will hate and insult him? By the way, the Goblin Swordsman has one peculiarity. When he sees in front of him a very strong opponent, begins to smile secretly and at the same time preparing to attack, he always prefers to fight with guys much stronger than himself. Since Johnson is also polite, he apologized to his opponent in advance, and said that he had no time to smile back. If you looked carefully at the last picture, you might have noticed that for some reason the guy's shoes are glowing red. This thing is called magical air shoes, which allow their owner to fly. The only disadvantage is that they cost mana. As the guy had been in the air for quite some time, the monster got tired of waiting and just sat back down. It was a surprise to the girl. For some reason she was sure that the monster would run after him to start the fight. But as it turned out once again, in this world is not all so obvious as it may seem. Meanwhile, Johnson, thanks to his magic slippers, with great speed moving around the city, the book told him that the goblin in no case do not attack first, so it is best not to touch him yet. It would be better to deal with the weaker defenders first, so that after the difficult fight with the goblin, do not waste your strength on them. Do not waste a minute. The guy flew with all his might with his foot in the face of the first guard pillar. He directly felt his production over him, and how much his personal power has increased. Just at that very moment the civilians were near the first monster. Now they were 100% convinced that the guy had really spent all their points, and unfortunately after the meeting people started to feel more and more anger and aggression. Anyway, Johnson didn't pay attention to them. He was totally focused on the fight. When suddenly the book told him that there is a unique crowd protector trait, and it can be activated if the guy fulfills the right conditions. Their essence is that they add weaknesses to the enemy. But in case the guy fails to fulfill the conditions, then instead of weaknesses strong features will be revealed, and it will be quite hard to deal with them. In case this guardian somehow destroys 100 people, then he will turn into a fallen angel who will destroy all humanity in this city. His power will increase significantly, and then he will leave his pillar to begin the process of destroying all life. That's why first you need to get rid of the guardians with such unpleasant traits, and at the same time unlock the positive traits that are needed for the mission. In this world, the most important thing is not just to complete a task, but to do it correctly so that the player can get as many positive effects as possible. Meanwhile, Justin was speeding toward the scene of the incident. He ordered everyone to stand at least 500 meters away from the pillars until they knew exactly what Johnson was up to. Now the military man was very curious. The guy just couldn't find a way to return the award, or he decided not to. Yes, at first glance he was not a bad person, but in any case you should not make decisions based on personal feelings. When it comes to the safety of people, you need to make only the right and cold decisions. Despite all these nuances with the people, Justin sincerely believed and hoped that Johnson is doing everything right and in the near future everything will get better, because a man with such intelligence and power can rule the whole city if he wants. Unfortunately, even Eva turned out to be completely unmanageable. It would be better if she helped to live the issue with Johnson than to be amateurish. As suddenly in the sky guys notice a large number of explosions, and at one moment right next to the car and the ground hit some red ray. The explosion was so strong that its wave was able to lift a really heavy car into the air, after which it did several somersaults, and was no longer usable. It was a good thing the whole crew was alive and no one was badly hurt. Then looking around, they saw Johnson, who was holding the wings of the tower's first defender. Compared to their last meeting, the guy definitely didn't look as confident or as powerful, but he had really changed for the better in that short period of time. By the way, the sword that is in the guy's hands is called Divine Division. It's just a fragment of the sword that once divided earth and heaven and created the world. The great thing about this weapon is that it can turn monsters' limbs into useful objects. When the military came closer, they immediately began to ask how the guy managed to defeat the Pillar Protector. In response, he just smiled at them, didn't talk, and just flew off to save the world. Since Justin is a pretty smart man, he was able to realize that the guy doesn't talk because of the victim's confidence, which gives the impression that he has no bad intentions. When the guy disappeared, the second trooper noticed that the first pillar's first defender was still alive. Before he disappeared, Johnson fulfilled the conditions for the special trait, namely removing the wings and halo from the fallen angel. As a result, the special trait was unlocked called Spoiling. The fallen angel without destiny turns into another creature. From now on, he would be called the Beast of Spoil. Is a monster who has lost faith and fallen to sin. God no longer watches over him. After this transformation, his difficulty rose to level 2. After what he saw, Justin was once again convinced that the life of a warrior was a challenge. Since there are only 3 monsters in this mission, they're equal in power to the entire raid. I wonder if Johnson really left it to them. In any case, in order not to appear to be an easy target, the guys immediately opened fire with almost all the weapons they had available. In the process of this operation, the military also banned reinforcements, no matter how the ammunition is infinite, and they can't keep firing for too long without interruptions. Basically, as you'd expect, the monster wasn't going to endure the unpleasant blows from the bullets on his skin for long, so he took off and attacked. As it turned out during the battle, this monster emits a negative effect called abnormal fear. The soldiers would literally, for no good reason, start crying, lose the will to fight, and simply start running away from their enemy. Eventually, everyone ran away and Justin was left alone. Because he had a magic helmet on his head, this negative effect did not affect him. But even in such a seemingly hopeless situation, the guy was not confused. He took in his hands his automatic rifle and almost in close proximity began to shoot back. At the moment, he is going to take the monster away from his subordinates, at least until the reinforcements. It's a hero's act, because not everyone these days can do that. It's an incredible risk that may not even be worth it. Right now, the monster is right above Justin's head, not even 10 minutes after the military officer started running. Unfortunately, a normal human being, with his physical attributes, can't even come close to matching a monster of this type. Sad as it may sound, but eventually landed directly on Justin, and under its enormous weight, left him with little chance of survival. But as they say, don't hurry to get upset early. At the same moment, Johnson appears on the battlefield with his magic book in his hands. Judging by the bright smile on his face, you can see that everything is going according to plan. Meanwhile, right from under the monster's foot, a bright light begins to appear. If you look at the monster's reaction, you can see how displeased he is. Apparently, this light was also quite painful. Thus, Johnson discovered the secret skill of the helmet that Justin possesses, and from that moment the wearer becomes possessed by the spirit of Heldin, the heretic Inquisitor. As a reward for fulfilling the secret conditions, the guy receives an iron baton of the goddess. This skill will work for 10 minutes, all equipment, and all skills will be imbued with divine power, also increased to the maximum level of protection against spoilage. Monster apparently does not understand what is happening, and how his opponent managed to survive. Then the fallen warriors start to get up from the ground. From this moment the skill was activated on absolutely all members of the squad. In the minds of all the fallen they had only one thing, thoughts of an iron club, which they just have to use for their intended purpose. Meanwhile, plus or minus a safe zone, Johnson watched all this, Frankly, it was even scarier than he could imagine. The next day, Justin went to the battalion commander to request a new vehicle because the old one had been destroyed. The commander said that he could provide the car, but after that Justin had to be on his own. By the way, his name is Ronald, personal level 1, class ordinary resident. The captain liked the fact that the guy was not afraid to voice his displeasure. After the car, they started to discuss further problems, for example such as intelligence. Recently, the military has almost no data from intelligence on the current situation. This means that it is necessary to find as soon as possible a calm observer who will report everything. It is desirable that he was cold-blooded and rational, because only such people can make the right decision at the right moment with 100% probability. These are the people who never lose their temper. Justin could think of no better candidates than the fallen warriors who had helped him in the battle yesterday. In general, the captain smoothly led to the fact that Justin is just perfect for this position. In the meantime, Johnson couldn't get enough of yesterday's successes. When the defender's stamina was already at 0, the guy made Justin and his squad deal with him, and he wasn't a bit wrong. Moreover, after the monster turned into another creature, the guy didn't fight anymore. That's why Justin became the most important person in that fight, and got his valuable honestly earned reward. As it turned out, the guy had been telling all this information to Bodyguard number 3. The only downside was that the monster couldn't talk, but at least the guy was glad that someone listened to him. Then Johnson offered him a bet, something he'd probably never done before in this game. The point of the bet was that the guy would be able to break the demon's seal, no matter what it took. In the meantime, Eva was in a fight against an anti-human machine, the complexity of which was of the first level. As it turned out later, there was not just one, but a whole bunch of such machines. The girl came to the second tower as soon as she heard someone's call for help. But now the question is different, whether she can help, because these monsters just no end, even though they are not the strongest, to destroy them endlessly, too, you cannot get, and you also need to take into account the fact that each of their new wave releases monsters an order of magnitude stronger than the previous ones. Eve suggests that she needs to destroy them as soon as possible with her superpowered main before it gets too dangerous. At one point, the girl orders all civilians to retreat, until further notice. Unfortunately, such a command people did not really want to fulfill, because as if they also need points, and to destroy rather weak monsters can be called a lucrative occupation. So despite such a request from the commander-in-chief, people continued to attack them. After all, each of them wanted to earn points to save their family, not to let other wounded people just lie on the ground like last time and gradually lose their lives. At the same moment, the crossbowman crept up from the back while the monster was busy doing its own thing. By the way, these crossbows were far from ordinary. The peculiarity of them was that they were constantly fueled by magic. In general, the guys thought that now without problems to aim accurately, and will be able to hit some weak spot, but as if not so. It turns out that the monster perfectly feels when it is threatened with danger, from some other side, so of course turned towards the guys. To be honest, they didn't expect such a turn of events, and even more so that it would happen so quickly. Without thinking long, the monster started to generate a powerful laser blast, and fired a shot right at the crossbowman. Thanks to her spear, she split the laser into 2 parts and saved the guys. To say that it was easy is impossible because in fact the girl was just a step away from retreating. At one point she began to get so hot that her clothes literally began to tear into small pieces, because of the higher temperatures. And at the very end, a serious explosion ensued. When the attack was over, it took Eve about 30 seconds to realize what had happened. Then she told those amateurs to leave the place immediately before the second volley started, because she wouldn't be able to block something like that twice in a row. The men did not even argue with her, took their hands in their legs and ran wherever they were, so much scared they have probably never been in their lives. It even made the girl laugh a little, because when men with tears in their eyes run away in different directions, while they are saved by a girl, it is always fun. But as they say, it was not the time to relax much, because at the moment the monster was focused specifically on Eve, the first thing he did was a full analysis to see how strong the person in front of him actually stood, and when the operation was completed successfully, he began to prepare an appropriate strike for her. Eve, in turn, immediately realized that this thing had started production of new robots that would be as strong as possible. The other robots that survived focused their attention solely on Eva and rushed to attack. This is a really drastic measure, if he was so offended. The girl stood with her arm folded, and at first went into a dumb defense to fend off each of them. Her skills allowed her to accomplish such difficult tasks. After that, the fire tornado didn't take long, and all those pathetic low-level robots lost their lives in the blink of an eye. Eve was now fully concentrated on her opponent, and was preparing to deliver her strongest blow, which she had thanks to Johnson. But before that, of course, she again urged everyone to get out of here as soon as possible, because the big blast wave would hit them. Finally, when the warnings were over, Eve sprang into action. The fireball began to move towards the monster with great speed, knowingly hinting to it that there was no chance of survival. When the target reached its destination, a large blast wave went off. Now exactly civilians will know that orders should be followed immediately, not only when something went wrong. Frankly speaking, they were not on a joke scared, and already began to think that Eva will destroy them all, even though she asked everyone in advance, as soon as possible, to leave here. By the way, after the attack, the girl felt better than ever, as symbolized by the smile on her face. Unfortunately, no critical damage could not be inflicted, because this world, as we already know, is not so simple. In general, this monster at the very last moment managed to create a robot that fully corresponds to Eve. It has the second level of complexity, but the robot is resistant to fire, armed with the Dragon Destroyer, automatically can track and detect the movement of the girl. He was also quite fast and able to fly, which allowed him to suddenly be at the girl's back. Then he immediately struck with a fiery sword, which she had to block with her bear. For some reason there was no spear in her hands at the moment. Unfortunately, it was not possible to hold back such power for long, and the girl, with a wound, flew in the opposite direction. It was painful to say the least, and it was especially unpleasant to feel that hard landing on the ground. As suddenly, by chance, the girl noticed something interesting, namely Johnson, who unexpectedly attacked the monster. Eve had no idea that she would ever be so happy about Johnson. The guy waited just the perfect moment and made a precise blow on the weak point of the opponent. No one even suspected that he was going to attack. In the end, after the guy did his dirty work, there was a big explosion, and under the noise, Johnson stole the girl right out from under the nose of the robot. It's just genius. To be honest, I didn't even realize what had happened until the sensors said it was gone. Then the system automatically started searching for the target, and the robot began to follow the trail. In the meantime, the system notified the guy that the next conditions for opening a new trade had been met. Now this monster will continue making the last item made, without learning the epic class. Also the production speed is doubled, and the amount produced is doubled. All this horror will only end when the target is completely destroyed and unable to function. To put it mildly, the situation is a little out of control. To cope with this monster was not so easy than Johnson could have imagined. The problem is that too many people are scared and hid God knows where, in search of them. Of course, no time at all. Meanwhile, at the first post, some people still continued to hold their defenses, but no matter how hard they tried, they could not penetrate the enemy, needing as much firepower as possible, which could not be provided at the moment. At the second post, there was a non-stop war with robots that just kept popping up new ones endlessly. Suddenly, 3 military vehicles jammed the battlefield of the second post. Johnson could have easily ended it all, but what's the point? People do not get points. In this game is not enough just to complete the mission, even at least need to make the city each time to become at least a little stronger. Otherwise, when there will be high-level opponents, people simply cannot survive. And for this, first of all, you need a capable commander with a squad of champions, who will organize the correct and well-coordinated work, which is so much needed in this situation. Meanwhile, For some reason, Eva was lying on the ground completely unconscious, and at one moment she woke up. The first thing she could see was the silhouette of a man. Eva thought it was her savior, so she started to thank him from the bottom of her heart. And when she looked closer, she realized it was the guard of the third pillar. Frankly speaking, she was not on a joke scared, and for some time they just kept silent. And when the girl started yelling, the warrior politely asked her to shut up, because he doesn't like it when someone is being very loud. At this point she had such a misunderstanding of the situation. To begin with, Eva apologized and then asked why the guard could talk. In response, the man said that he would heal the girl's wounds, and they didn't have much time, so they should start right away. Naturally, Eva did not even understand where they had to go, and what was about to begin. Then the warrior began to speak in riddles, saying that it was necessary to meet a great teacher after a terrible defeat, and then to become stronger. As you might expect, the girl understood absolutely nothing of what was said above. At that moment there were only a lot of questions in her mind. Meanwhile, the robot that hunts Eva unfortunately managed to detect her with its radar. The distance between them is 325 meters. It is literally a few seconds of flight. Then the robot started the process of preparing for destruction, but no such luck. At the same moment on the horizon appears Johnson, who with just one hand intercepted the opponent. Then the guy used a skill called Mad Brain. He leads the monsters astray, with the help of robot attributes, and disarms mechanical traps 5 times per mission. So while the robot was aiming to hit Eve, the guy used his power to aim the shot right at one of the pillars, and it hit the target. To be more precise, initially the robot didn't even suspect that he could shoot in the wrong place, because the program showed him that everything was going as it should. In the end, everything went really more than fine, only not for the robot, but for Johnson. That should be enough damage to keep the pillar from regenerating, but that's unless the guy miscalculated. You just look at how much of a surprise this program creature is. In the meantime, Eva and her new trainer have started training. At the moment they have a light training sparring. Every time after the warriors carry a blow, he asks the girl to try to use her power. And at one point, she finally succeeds. The teacher also asked her not to forget that at the moment the girl was not using her power, and if she tried hard enough, she was very likely to hurt herself badly. In this respect, mistakes are not forgiven. The force should by no means take the days up. The most important thing is self-control. When the training was over, Eva decided to ask if she really had a chance to defeat this robot, and if so, how big it was. For some reason the guard didn't want to answer, and just ignored her. Now the silence on his part is what is very demotivating for the girl. First of all, she would like some support, and to raise her morale. The warrior wondered why the girl had allowed him to teach her, what the reason for such an act was. To be frank, she does not even know the answer to this question. At least this game and the missions are full of things that she simply does not understand, and to be frank, the girl is not smart enough to find answers to them through reflection. So the right decision would be to first strengthen her body, and it does not matter who or what will accompany it. The most important thing is the result. Previously she has always lived on this principle, and as you can understand is not in a hurry to abandon it, because she sees nothing wrong with it. The warrior assumed that Johnson was just using her as a tool, but it turned out to be not so simple. In general, in the end, the girl thanked the master for such good lessons, also promised to continue to study martial arts and follow her own path. And so from that moment it has already been 3 days. People completely without strength and any enthusiasm to fight further sat in the subway, and only in dreams could see how well they used to live, until that fateful day, when their city gradually began to rise in the air. The only wish of each of them was that everything would end as soon as possible. Suddenly, one girl saw through the system that a battle had broken out near one of the pillars, and started agitating everyone to get up and go there. She wouldn't forgive herself if the mission failed just because they were holed up in the subway instead of helping their brothers. Suddenly at one point people heard a rather strange sound. For some reason, right through the wall, a horrible robot that is supposed to be hunting Eve, not normal humans, burst in on them. It then stood in one spot, ran a search for a signal on the girl, located her, and then started preparing to fire a shot right through the wall. Did indeed she was in there somewhere. Then he announced aloud that the target had begun to move, followed by literally countless shots. People started screaming and begging for help. Even though the robot wasn't shooting at them, they could still get hurt, shrapnel flying everywhere. At the moment when everything subsided, the robot reported that the target had been destroyed, the task was completed, we could return home. When he looked closely, he noticed that instead of the girl's body, the body of the one who had created it had fallen out. Just imagine his surprise at what he had seen. In that case, without wasting a moment, he started searching for the target again, but evil was already there. People, instead of rejoicing at the upcoming salvation, began to be even more afraid, because they did not understand the first time who it was so beautiful, shining to them came. The robot was very surprised, because the girl became before him in the guise of an angel. At least her appearance has changed a little, she holds her spear much more confidently, and her hair emits a beautiful fiery light.